almost 2 million have made attempts and survived. And these numbers are just the numbers that we can estimate or know. So there are lots of folks that don't get captured in this that maybe never seek help or survive their attempt and never tell anybody. In Montgomery County in 2023, there were 101 suicide deaths. That's a 13% increase from 2022 and a 28% increase from 2020. And a lot of that we think has to do with most of our counties are seeing this kind of issue, issues with COVID, and then everything that come along with how the economy changed and people losing jobs and getting sick, losing loved ones. There's lots of reasons that can go into these numbers trending, unfortunately, the way they're going. Now, I don't have the exact numbers for 24, but I don't believe it's nearly this high the last I checked. So again, we're starting to trend down. And hopefully in the next year, we'll have better numbers to understand a few more years removed post-COVID to see if the efforts that we've been making are working. So when we talk about suicide, myths or facts. So the first one, no one can stop a suicide. It's inevitable. Once a person decides to die by suicide, there's nothing we can do to stop them. Who think that that's true? Raise your hand if anybody's willing, or just think, you don't have to put your hand up. Fortunately, this is a myth. What we do understand is that if you offer someone hope or a lifeline or just be present, a lot of times suicide will come off the table. There's a psychologist who does primarily work with people who are actively suicidal on an outpatient basis. Dr. Jobs is his name. And he did a presentation one time about made me fell out of my chair almost. He told a client one time, he said, I'm not saying suicide is not an option. All I'm asking is you give me 6 sessions, and if nothing has improved, if you don't see any hope, if you don't see any change, if you don't see any reason to stay alive, it's kind of still your option. And up until that presentation, Dr. Jobs hasn't lost a patient to suicide. So he works with guys and gals who are actively suicidal but not hospitalized, because that's the other thing. Not everyone who has suicidal crises needs to be thrown in the hospital. For some people, that can actually make them worse. It can be counterproductive. Now, we do have to make sure people are safe, so sometimes we do have to hospitalize against someone's decision, but that is only as a last resort. The next one, asking a person about suicide will make them angry or increase the risk or give them the idea. This is another myth. What we understand is asking about suicide tells the person, A, that we've noticed something is wrong, so we're paying attention. B, we care enough about them to ask, what is going on with you? How are you feeling? I'm here. But we also understand that, yes, it might make them angry, but guess what? They'll be alive to forgive you. And I'd like to share a short personal example. So I had a friend in high school who, after we graduated, became suicidal. And he called me, and it just felt like one of those conversations where he was saying goodbye, and it was just wrong. So I called the police and sent him to his home, and he got put in the hospital. He needed to be safe. He couldn't maintain his own safety. We were very, very close. He didn't speak to me for 2 years. And that was heartbreaking for me. But I also knew that he got the help he needed. He was still alive. He eventually sat down with me and we had a conversation where he said, I almost hated you for a while. I didn't want to go to the hospital. I didn't want you to save me. I didn't want anybody to save me, I thought. But now I'm glad I'm still here. And if it wasn't for you, that may not have happened. So yes, he was angry with me, but guess what? He was also alive to forgive me. And I didn't have to live with keeping my feelings a secret and him doing something and me having to live with that feeling, because that's not something I would wish on anybody. Next one. White men over the age of 45 to 65 die at the highest rate of suicide. What do you think? Think about it for a second. This one is kind of a trick question. So we do know that men in this age range, Caucasian men, are at the highest risk because they tend to use the most lethal means. They tend to use firearms, which which is lethal about 95% of the time. People can survive a suicide attempt by firearm, but then they deal with all kinds of the ramifications that come from those kinds of injuries. We also know that the Native American community has a very high rate of suicide if you count population-wise, but in general, this is like the target population for most of the suicide prevention coalitions that I work with, because we don't have a lot of Native Americans in the area that we serve. But we also know that the African American community is at elevated risk when you just look at race demographics and don't account for age or any of those other kinds of changes. Another one, people considering suicide will keep their plans to themselves. People who talk about suicide won't actually do it, they're just seeking attention. This is one I hear quite often. They don't really mean they're suicidal, they're just saying that to get attention. Well, here's my response to that. We have an acute psychiatry unit at our VA. It's a locked ward for people that can't maintain their safety and need to be monitored 24/7. It's not a fun place to be. It's not Club Med. I don't like going up there, and I have keys. I can come and go when I want to. It is not the greatest place to be. But we often have veterans who are not suicidal who will come to our urgent care and say they're suicidal knowing they're going to get put on acute psych. And it's not necessarily a place that they want to go to, but what happens is they don't necessarily have the words or the understanding to say, I'm in crisis, I don't know how to help myself. They know if they say they're suicidal, they're going to be put on a unit where they have access to a psychiatrist and 24-hour nursing care and doctors, and they'll get their meds. And so all of these things that they are struggling with will somehow get addressed in a short time frame with a good discharge plan when they leave. So even those who say they're going to kill themselves, and you're like, I don't think you really mean it, or you don't seem that serious, you got to take them seriously. You guys ever heard of people who are called cutters, who cut themselves, self-injuring behavior? A lot of times cutters are trying to find relief. That's why the cutting, because it releases endorphins in the brain that actually biochemically make you feel better. They're often called attention seekers, but what they're trying to do is simply relieve their pain. And sometimes they accidentally go too far and may die. We have to take anybody who talks about suicide just as seriously, because we never know when the threat they're making that we don't believe may be the time they say, okay, I'll show you. So yes, they may be asking for attention, but it's to get help, not because they want sympathy or pity or want you to drop everything and make them the center of attention. That does sometimes happen, but it's really because maybe they don't know how else to get help they need, and that's the only way they can get people to sort of mobilize. If asked about suicide, people will be honest with their thoughts. Think about that for a second. That one is actually almost always true. This is not a myth. If you ask the question in the right way, show you're compassionate, show you're present, you're empathetic, and you want to listen. You're not just doing it as they're walking out the doorway or as you're passing somebody in the hallway. Like it's a genuine connection. I have found that by and large, people will be honest about their feelings. Maybe not right away and maybe not fully, but they're going to give you a little bit of insight into that crack that they're dealing with, that crack in their armor. All right, next one. Men die by suicide more, but women attempt more often. What we know statistically is men die at about 3 times the rate of women because they tend to use firearms, which is the most lethal means usually. Women attempt about 4 times more often. But the top 2 methods for women are overdose and cutting usually, because the thing about people who want to die is they want it to be painless. They want to just go to sleep. They want it to be quick. They want it to be pain-free, because we have an aversion to pain. It's a natural biological imperative. And so when we talk about men dying at higher rates, they don't attempt more, but they die at a higher rate because of the firearm usage. Now, the only exception are female veterans. Female veterans tend to use firearms at a higher rate than civilians. And the last one, suicide is a death of despair or loneliness. There was a book that a former Surgeon General did that talked about suicide being the death of despair, or loneliness being another public health crisis. And what we understand is a lot of times there's no other way out that they see. So death is the only way to end their pain. And so we do know that it is a death of despair and loneliness. And oftentimes, if you can make a genuine connection, that kind of despair or loneliness may come down just enough to where they're able to work through what's going on. So let's talk about the warning signs. What do we look for that someone might be approaching a suicidal crisis? Now, I will caveat this in saying, unless someone specifically talks about death, wanting to die, looking for ways to die, we have to start clustering these together. Just one or two of them by themselves doesn't necessarily mean someone's suicidal, because a lot of us struggle every day with stress. So when we start seeing these things clustered together, that's when we should start becoming a little concerned. So let's talk about some of these. Being fired or being expelled from school. Remember we talked about loss of relationships or loss of something being one of those 5 stressors, like divorce, for example. Well, if you lose your job, are underemployed, get kicked out of school, that can be a really big red flag. One, that something's not going right where you got fired or expelled in the first place, so you're already struggling. But 2, if you talk about guilt and shame with the school situation, or how are they going to pay their bills now, finding another job. We saw this a lot with COVID, with people becoming underemployed. So losing their regular jobs and having to take jobs that didn't pay as much because they just needed something to help cover the bills. That can be a huge stressor. A recent unwanted move. We see this a lot, especially in the younger community, like in our preteen, teen age range. You know, if the parents have to move, especially if they have to change schools or move out of a neighborhood where all the kids' friends are located. So that can be one of the warning signs, especially for our youth. Another one is loss of any major relationship. And this doesn't have to just be by death. This could be ending a friendship, ending a romantic relationship, a divorce, losing custody of a child, having a stepchild and that relationship ending and that relationship with your stepchild changing. So there's lots of different losses of relationships. We also understand that having a serious terminal illness or chronic physical pain is a big red flag. I mean, think about if you're in pain all the time and you can't get any sort of significant relief. That can really ramp you up in the crisis area sometimes. Or if we talk about people that have terminal illnesses that know that they're incurable, sometimes we'll choose to control, for lack of a better word, how their life is going to end. Sudden unexpected loss of freedom or fear of punishment. So loss of freedom, think about that as someone who has a medical condition and can't drive anymore, whether it's age or loss of sight or early dementia or, whatever reason. So think about everybody probably drove here or somebody drove you here. Imagine if you couldn't drive yourself anywhere for a while. I had a back surgery and was unable to drive for 4 months 2 years ago. And I'm used to hopping in the car and going whenever I want, wherever I want. You take that kind of thing for advantage when you lose it. You don't realize it. And I really struggled for those 4 months, having to rely on people to get me to work or to get me to the grocery store or the gas station, or it was awful. So imagine someone, let's say 70, 80 plus, who loses their driving privileges, who's been taking care of themselves their whole life, or who gets put in a nursing home, or who now can't physically take care of themselves and need to rely on others. That's a loss of freedom too. It's not just about that fear of punishment where I've done something wrong and I might go to jail, but people who have upcoming legal charges can definitely fit into that category. Anticipated loss of financial security, we kind of touched on that one. Loss of a cherished therapist, counselor, or teacher. So when kids change grades, if your mental health provider that you've been seeing for therapy suddenly takes another position, or you move and you have to change mental health providers, that can be a huge shock for people. Because if you think about teachers and therapists, they're big confidants. We oftentimes will talk to them about things that we may not mention to others. And so it's important to keep in mind that we can really struggle when we lose those that we most confide in. Like, it could even be the loss of a relationship or the death of a loved one that you always went to for problems. Access to lethal means, we're going to touch on that here in just a little bit. Homelessness or housing instability, not knowing how you're going to pay your rent month to month, is a huge stressor. Impulsivity, so doing things without fully thinking, and this can be anything from drug use to sexual behavior to driving too fast to just reacting instead of thinking about anything. And then this last one, I'm sorry, cut off a little bit on the bottom, is withdrawing. So withdraw from your normal, whether that's not leaving the house for weeks on end or being able to get off the couch, which is like the stereotypical presentation for depression we think of. But it can also be you're still doing life, but you're not connecting with people. I'll give you another personal example. I'm 44 years old. When I got here this morning, because I drove here from Washington Courthouse, I had to text my mom and tell her I made it. Because if I hadn't, she would have freaked out. She'd have been calling me. She'd have been trying to figure out which church in Dayton I'm at. Like, she just worries. So I text her and let her know I'm here. My brother, who turns 40 in a couple weeks, we don't hear from him for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. No big deal. He's fine. Something happens, he'll reach out. So we have very different ways we connect and how we're involved with other people. So what you want to look for when someone's withdrawing is that lack of connection. Are they still attending to life, but maybe not connecting the way they used to, or they're not opening up, or they seem withdrawn, or they seem quieter, or they seem more into themselves? Sometimes we have to worry about that kind of thing. Another way to think about it is to look at it in individual, relationship, societal, and community risk factors. And I'm sorry this slide is all messed up, but basically what it talks about is like having a previous history of suicide attempts, or having substance use issues, a history of childhood trauma, for example. What we see a lot in our veterans, especially those who were in a combat zone, is post-traumatic stress disorder. And that constant hypervigilance is exhausting. And so sometimes when you have certain mental health diagnoses, it can make you more at risk. Then we talk about relationship things like bullying, family history of suicide, conflicts or violence in a relationship. And this doesn't have to just be physical violence. This can be verbal abuse as well. Then we talk about societal risk factors. You guys ever heard of suicide contagion or cluster effect? We see this sometimes in our teens. Like if, say, someone dies by suicide in a high school or middle school even, sometimes we will see a spike in attempts or even suicide deaths in that community or in that school. So postvention is when someone dies by suicide, we try to support those that are affected. Because for one suicide death, up to 135 people can be affected. Whether that's the immediate close family, which is that tightest circle, we go out another circle, think about like ripples on the water. We could talk about coworkers, people in their church congregation. Go out another layer. Maybe we're talking about when we lose a celebrity. We see the contagion effect sometimes when we lose a celebrity to suicide. All the way to just knowing someone died by suicide can still have an effect on you just as being a member of that community. And then we talk about community, so that's a lot of stigma and having easy access to lethal means, but also how we talk about suicide in the media. We don't want to talk about method. We don't want to talk about, this being how they attempted or all that. We want to talk about they struggled and here's the number you reach out to if you need help. We don't want to talk about the means and how the person died. That can actually be very triggering for other people. So how the media portrays a suicide death is very important, but also how we talk about it. We try not to say now commit suicide because it almost criminalizes or makes it sound like it's a super bad thing that they did in terms of they're morally bankrupt or it's a criminal thing. So we try to say died by suicide, completed suicide, Suicided is actually a newer word. But when we take away that sort of criminality aspect, just how we talk about it can help with the stigma. One more way to think about suicide risk. So there's another suicidologist that works at the University of Florida, Dr. Joyner. And what he talks about are the risk factors for suicide that people are capable and want to die by suicide. And where those circles intersect are the people that can actually die. And what his research found is we have a biological imperative to preserve life and avoid pain. So dying by suicide is actually a difficult thing to do because we don't want it to be painful. A lot of times there will be physical reactions like moving or jerking or stopping yourself at the last minute. So the people that override those things, like people who are adrenaline junkies, for example, people who purposely do things that put themselves in jeopardy, like EMTs, firefighters, police officers. Personally, if I hear gunfire, I'm going to duck or run the other way, whereas most police officers have this like natural instinct to run towards and help. But that overrides that imperative of preservation of life and avoidance of pain. So they become capable of suicide. Then we have the folks who want to die by suicide in this other circle, and those are folks who feel like they're a burden. That even though short term my family may be sad, long term they're going to be better off if I'm not here anymore because I'm such a burden. Or what I call the nesses: hopelessness, worthlessness, helplessness. Also, what he talks about is what's called a thwarted sense of belonging. And that means you don't feel like you fit in anywhere. You don't feel like you belong. No one gets what you're going through. Your situation is unique somehow. And those people are the ones who desire to die by suicide to end their pain. So when you cross over the two, that's why we know our first responders and our veterans, for example, are at such higher risk than the community population to die by suicide because they have that second circle most of us don't have. All right, so let's talk about some things that work in our favor that can help someone not make a suicide attempt. These are called protective factors. One of the biggest ones that I hear from people is a sense of spirituality. So a lot of times I would hear from folks, I would never kill myself because I believe I would go to hell, and I don't want to do that. I want to go to heaven, be with God. That's a huge protective factor, and it's a great one to have. But just like all the rest of the ones listed, there is no one protective factor that is 100% guaranteed to stop someone from acting on a suicidal thought. Your mind can get so dark and quicker than you think, and your thoughts can go there faster than you're able to catch them sometimes. So even a strong sense of spirituality, while immensely important, isn't going to be the end-all be-all and say, I would never do this because. Because remember, it's about ending pain. And if your pain spikes and it feels like it's overwhelming and unable to be dealt with, your mind can take you there and you not even consciously do it on purpose. Some other protective factors: sense of connectedness. Here's an interesting nugget of information. Did you know that when a major city's sports team, whether it doesn't matter the sport, football, basketball, baseball, hockey, when the city's sports team wins a major championship, for the next few months, suicide in that town or that city goes way down. And think about that sense of connectedness. When you feel like you don't belong, when you're a burden, when nobody understands what you're feeling, and all of a sudden you can talk to a complete stranger about something that's a happy feeling or memory, you're connected to someone just for that short, brief moment. You'd be amazed how important that sense of connection can be for somebody that's contemplating suicide. Same thing around the holidays. Most people think around Thanksgiving, Christmas, suicide rates go up. They either plateau or go down. And think about what happens during the holidays. People have churches they can go to for meals. There are food banks or warming centers or, all kinds of nonprofits do things around the holidays like free meals or events or, whatever. And so you can feel connected without actually having to intimately connect with someone. It's in the spring where we see the suicides start to come up because people are activated. They're not like shut up in the house because of the bad weather. But also, a lot of those things that make us feel connected that happen during the holidays stop after January. So you don't feel connected anymore, and sometimes that can increase your risk. Having a sense of mission or purpose. This is a big risk factor for our veteran population. Once they're out of the military, a lot of times they lose that sense of purpose, that camaraderie that they've built within the military structure. And so they're kind of on their own when they're a civilian again. So having that mission or purpose of like finding what they should be doing to make their life meaningful. We often see this too in people that retire or have to medically stop working, especially if it's not their choice to stop working for medical reasons, lose their sense of purpose. I mean, think about when you meet somebody for the first time, you've probably heard what they do within the first 5 or 10 minutes as a job for most people. It's just part of how we identify ourselves. So say you lose something like that or lose your career or don't have a career, don't feel like you have a sense of purpose. So having that sense of purpose or mission can be a huge protective factor. And then social emotional well-being or the ability to find joy. And we often mistake joy as we have to be happy all the time and everything has to be great. What we often do in mental health, like therapy for example, is try to help people understand that joy is in the small little things. Like, I have a 1-year-old puppy, and then I have my other dogs are 10 and 11. So big difference. Crazy, I got a puppy. But he, come out this morning and he's full of energy and he's rambunctious and he's happy to see me because he's been sleeping all night. That just made my heart feel full. That's a moment of joy. Coming here and talking to you guys, this is a passion project for me. I could do this all day, every day, because I want to help people. This is a moment of joy for me. It doesn't mean the rest of my day is not going to stink or I'm not going to run into difficulties or stressors. So finding joy is in the small moments, and that's what we try to help people understand. It's not about being happy all the time. It's about finding pockets of happy. That's a huge protective factor for mental health. So, how do we ask the question? First of all, you want to be direct. You want to ask as soon as you've identified some of the warning signs, but you want it to flow in the conversation. You don't want to come just right out and say, are you thinking about killing yourself? Now, sometimes you do have to do that if you see the bigger red flags, like somebody talking about death or dying, somebody looking for ways to end their life. That's a whole other conversation. That's like 911, let's get you to the hospital. This is more, you don't seem like yourself. You seem like you're struggling with things. I'm a little worried about you. What's going on? That's how you can kind of start the conversation. Or you can say things like, when other people experience some of the stuff you've been going through, sometimes they struggle. Are you starting to feel that way? Even before you get into asking about suicide, you can sort of start laying the foundation for it to make it feel like it flows. If they're resistant or hesitant, be persistent, but be respectful. You don't want to badger them, but you do want to ask it sometimes more than once. Check your assumptions, your judgment, and your bias at the door. This is not about you, your beliefs in suicide, what happens to the person who might be in crisis if they die by suicide. This is, you're struggling, and I want to give you a life preserver so you don't drown. So make sure your judgments are checked, your biases are checked, and your assumptions about why somebody might be suicidal. We have no idea what's going on up here for people sometimes. Allow them to talk openly and freely. Give yourself plenty of time and do it in privacy whenever possible. If not possible, that's okay. Try to have a quiet conversation, but do ask the question. Don't not ask it because it's not the right time or place. Sometimes it's never the right time or place. Don't search for a no. You don't want to ask the question like, you're not really thinking of hurting yourself, right? You're okay, right? You're telling the person, please tell me no. Please don't answer that question positively. So you want to ask it in a way that allows them to communicate. My grandpa always said you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a good reason. You should always listen twice as much as you talk. And this is also an opportunity to practice being uncomfortable in silence. As a therapist, this was the hardest thing for me to learn. When I ask my client a question in a therapy session and they just sit there kind of thinking, and I'm like, oh, maybe I should ask another question. Maybe I should make a comment. Maybe I should clarify. We get uncomfortable in silence and we want to talk more. This is an opportunity to throw out the question, let them think about their response and answer. So you're going to want to fill the silence. Please try not to do that. Allow them space to process what you've just asked them, because you may be the first person who's ever asked the question that way, where they want to talk about it, so they need a minute to kind of formulate their thoughts. Offer hope, but don't harp or overpromise. So you want to say things like, there's hope in help. You know, as long as you're alive, things have a chance to get better. You don't want to say everything's going to be all right, because it might not be. Things suck sometimes for people, and life is difficult, and we have a hard time dealing with things as they come up. So you don't ever want to say it's all going to be all right, because we don't know that. You also don't want to say, I know exactly how you feel. Because even one person's two suicidal crises, if they've had one and then say a few months later have another one, can be vastly different from each other. They may not even know how they feel. But you also don't want to overharp on the positive. You can remind them of positive things like, you have a family who loves you, I care for you, you have a good job that matters, you can talk about the positives, but be careful not to overharp on them, because remember, they've convinced themselves they're a burden, and that the only way for their pain to stop is for them to no longer be alive. And if you start pointing out all the reasons they should stay alive, sometimes it's counterproductive, and they may think, well, geez, I'm a bigger loser than I thought I was. Here's all the great things in my life, and I still want to die. So you want to point out some positives, but always do it with a grain of minimalization, I guess is the best way to say it. So, you ask the question, are you thinking about killing yourself? Have you thought about suicide? Have you thought about ways you want to die? Do you want to die by your own hand? However you ask it, be very direct. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's probably going to shock the other person. But it's important that you ask it very directly. You don't want to beat around the bush. So, I have done this for 18 years. I've always been in mental health, and I will be honest with you. When I'm going to ask somebody this question, I still have to take just a second, take a breath, and kind of get myself steeled, because I know what to do if they say yes. This is what I've been trained in. And it still makes me uncomfortable and nervous just for a split second, as long as I've been doing it. So please don't not ask the question because of your own uncomfortableness. Remember, this might save someone else's life. So if they say yes, now what? Oh my goodness. Well, try to stay calm. If you freak out, they're going to freak out. Your anxiety levels are going to match each other, and you're both going to be a hot mess. So try to stay as calm as you can. Remember, suicide is not the problem, but it is a perceived solution to an unsolvable problem that they feel they have. You want to maintain eye contact and open body language. So try not to, be closed off. 70% of how we communicate is nonverbal. So you want to be as relaxed physically as you can be verbally. Listen more than you speak. Limit asking questions. Be honest. You can say, I don't have the answer. I don't know exactly how to help you, but I know where you can go to get that kind of help. So be honest. You can't fix it. Your role is not to fix it, even though that's our natural response. We want to fix when people we care about is in pain. We want to make it go away. We can't always do that. So be honest. Express concern, but normalize if you can. I'm worried about you, but there are lots of people who struggle, who go through the same thing you're going through, and we can get you help. So you want to normalize it. Other people feel this way. You might feel this way again. If it's true, you can even share, I've felt this way before, as something you can say to the other person. Only if it's true. You don't want to lie to normalize, because a lot of times they'll see right through that. So be honest if you've had struggles and feel comfortable sharing, because then you can use that as an opportunity to say, hey, here's what worked for me. Do you want to try it? And stay with the person until they're safe or can access help if possible. You don't want to leave them by themselves. want to ask things like, will you go with me to get help? Not you go get help. Will you come with me? Or will you let me help you get help? What can we do to keep you safe for now? Do you see it's not a you and an I thing, but a we thing? We're trying to increase that sense of connectedness because they feel worthless, helpless, hopeless. Things are never going to get better. Nobody understands how I feel. And just using that kind of language can really help a person feel like you care and feel connected. You can offer encouragement and say things like, I want you to live. I want you to be around. It matters to me that you're here. I've said this to total strangers before in a therapy session, somebody that I don't even know that well, but I genuinely mean it. So every person in this room has a level of compassion where they can say something like that to a person. But remember, be honest. If that's not what you're feeling in the moment, don't use this one. Get others involved. You can ask the person who else might be able to help. Family, friends, siblings, parents, clergy members, a particular person in the church, the bishop, the psychologist, a physician. Anybody can be part of the support system. But help them figure out who that might be. Because when we're in crisis, we can't even remember our own social security number sometimes. And that's something we learned when we were this high, most of us. So you want to make sure that when you're asking them who they can involve, give them some ideas, but let them kind of contemplate, all right, who would I go to if I was having a hard time? And let them know you care what happens to them. Just being present and asking the question could be enough to save a life. All right, so things that we can do. This is what's called a safety plan, and I put two different versions up here. What a safety plan is a document that a person can do by themselves or with the help of a therapist or with the help of a friend or a family member to document how they're going to deal with a crisis. So when you do a safety plan, you want to do it when the person is not in crisis, because it's going to be a plan of stages of how to deal with when I start feeling overly stressed or overwhelmed or can't cope. So the first thing you're going to talk about is, what are your warning signs that you're beginning to spiral a little bit? Is it not answering social media posts? Is it I start sleeping 18 hours a day? Is it my appetite goes away? Anything can be a warning sign, a change to the normal, okay? The next section talks about coping skills. What can I do by myself to distract myself until the crisis has come down to a manageable level? This could be things like a favorite hobby, going people watching, going to the park, going shopping at Walmart. It can be anything, reading a book. But it's something you do for yourself, by yourself, to simply provide a distraction. If that doesn't help, you move to the next step of the safety plan, which is, what can I do with other people to simply offer a distraction? So can I go to my friend's house and watch a movie? Would I ask my brother to go play basketball with me? Am I going to ask my friend to come out to a movie or go shopping or go to lunch? So you're not dealing with the issue directly. What you're doing is giving yourself a distraction or a vent valve, sort of, until the crisis kind of comes down a little bit to where it feels manageable, and then you start dealing with it at that point. Let's say that doesn't work. The next section is going to be, who do I reach out to for help? These are going to be people that I would actually say, I'm struggling and I need help, whatever help might look like, whether it's a ride to a doctor's office or coming to make a meal, going grocery shopping for them, doing their laundry. Help can look like anything. It doesn't have to be, let me rush you to the hospital or get you to a psychologist or a social worker sometimes. Because remember, crises can be little to full-blown, we need to go to the hospital and everything in between. It's a continuum. It's not a you're in crisis or you're not. So when we talk about those we're going to reach out to for social support, it can be professionals, but it can also be friends, family, people you've connected with on some level. But you want to make sure to write their phone number down on the paper. Because here's the thing, when you do a safety plan, you want to put it somewhere you can find it, like stick it on the fridge, fold up, put it in your wallet, something like that, so that you have easy access to it. The reason you write the phone numbers down, I get a lot of people who say, oh, no, that's okay. I have it in my cell phone. What if your cell phone dies? What if in the crisis you get mad and you break it? What if you don't have access to it and you need to get a hold of somebody right away? Or I hear a lot, oh, I know that number. I know my mom's number off, like, I can roll it out, no problem. But remember, when we're in crisis, sometimes we can't remember the simplest information because that part of our brain stops working because we're in crisis mode. So put the phone numbers down. This is also helpful because you, as a support person for whomever the safety plan is being made, can use their support system call list to kind of reach out yourself and say, hey, Bob is struggling. You're listed as one of Bob's people he goes to for support. Can you come check on Bob with me or for me? So you can also use it for a loved one, but you want to make sure you write down the numbers. The last part of the safety plan is seeking help from professionals. Local emergency phone number. Have you guys heard of 988? 988 is the 911 for mental health. So if you're having chest pains, you call 911. If you're having a mental health crisis, you can call 988. It used to be a big 800 number, 1-800-273-8255. That's really hard to remember if you're in crisis, right? I ask a lot of my clients that I work with to put it in their phone, but even then, you might forget it's in there. We all can remember 911, so that's why they created 988. Did you also know you can call 988 on behalf of someone, even if they're not present with you, and say, hey, look, my sister isn't doing so good and she won't talk to me about what's going on. They will reach out to her. And this is a trained mental health professional that does nothing but crisis line work. So 988 is your go-to. If you have a veteran, you can press 1 and they're taken directly to a call center staffed by veterans that just deal with veterans, but anybody can call 988 and get sent to the local crisis hotline. It's 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. You can even call for yourself and say, look, my dad is really struggling, and while he's hooked up with the help he needs, I'm still really worried about him. Because guess what? As a caregiver, you got to care for yourself as much as you care for the person that you're worried about. So you can use 988 when you feel like you're starting to experience crisis because of the crisis that you're dealing with a loved one. And it's not on this one, but it's on the next one if it didn't get cut off. There it is. Making the environment safer. So what are 1 or 2 things that you can do to make your environment safe when you're in crisis? Now this is where things like gun locks come into play. So I brought 100 gun locks. And now the keys are universal because I have a lot of people say, oh, bike lock. No. If anybody has one of these, they have a key they can get on it. It's not a bike lock. It's a gun lock. The other thing that I have, and I have a picture of it next actually, is a gun cleaning mat. So this is like a neoprene type material that you can use when you're cleaning your firearms to keep your liquids and your chemicals from getting everywhere. You put your parts on it when you take your weapon apart, if you've ever maintained a firearm. But it also shows on here how to attach gun locks to 5 different kinds of firearms. Here's why gun locks are so important, and especially part of a safety plan. Owning a firearm makes you more likely to die by suicide by firearm. It doesn't mean you're going to become suicidal because you own a gun. What we understand is putting time and distance between thought and means. So put the gun lock on the gun, store the keys away from the gun, like in another room, or when you're approaching crisis, one way you can make the environment safe is even if your guns are locked up, give the keys to somebody else so you can't get into it. Because just a few seconds that it would take to go get the keys, unlock the firearm if you're thinking about harming yourself with a gun, can be enough time for you to go, what am I doing, and reach out for help. Or for someone to interrupt your process and say, look, we need to get you help right now. Let's not do this. I brought 100 of these. If you guys have multiple firearms, take as many as you need. I brought 50 of these. If you would like some, if you know people who would like them, take extras. The more hands we can put gun locks in, the safer weapons are. It also is good for if you own firearms and you have children in the home. No matter how great you train your kids to never touch a firearm, it can still happen. Kids have friends over who may get into it, so this is also good if you have children to lock up your weapon where you still have easy access to it for protection, because this literally pops open, you take it off, but it can keep your kids safe as well. All right, so when we're talking about getting people help, the best option is taking them directly to someone who can help them, whether that's calling 988 and handing them the phone, taking them to urgent care to be evaluated like the ER, getting them to their mental health provider, calling their therapist if they have one. That's the best option. If that's not an option, or if they refuse, the next best is getting a commitment from them to accept help and then make arrangements for that help to happen. So it could be something like saying, all right, you won't go to the emergency room right now, and I think that that's all right. I'm not worried that you're going to do anything right this second. But I'm going to call you first thing tomorrow morning, and we're going to call your therapist together. Or I'm going to take you to the VA so you can be evaluated, or whatever. It depends on the situation. So getting a commitment that we may not get help right this second because you're not at what's called imminent risk, but we're going to do it in the next 24 hours maybe. The third best referral is to give them information and try to get a good faith commitment that if their situation worsens, they'll reach out to you or they'll reach out to 988, and give them the options of what they can do to access help. Talked about 988 already. Okay, some things about Montgomery County. There is a very large, very active suicide prevention coalition in Montgomery County that anyone can join and become active in. They do events in the community and outreaches and educations and trainings, and they're a wonderful coalition. If anybody's interested, I didn't bring it with me, but I can get you the contact information. Most coalitions meet once a month, and they'll talk about issues in their community and how to help their community. So it's also a way to empower you to feel like you are able to deal with someone who might be in crisis. Some other things that can help, there is a Miami Valley Warm Line on top of 988. There are resources to connect to. There's a crisis text line. This QR code will take you to a page, a local help page. There's also other trainings you can do. So similar to what we did today, where we talk about the warning signs, how to ask the question, is called QPR, Question, Persuade, Refer. So you can take that again if you want another one of these talks to kind of go over it again, keep it fresh. There is Minimize Risk, Maximize Life training. There is Safe Med Practices, Safe Talk. If you go to the Montgomery County ADAMH board, which is the Alcohol, Drug, and Mental Health Board, it's mcadamhs.org, and click on training. There's all kinds of things you can do for free to help kind of better educate yourself. All right, so that is all that I had from my presentation. I would love to take questions, comments, concerns, anything you'd like me to go in depth about. I'd be happy to take those now. Yes, ma'am. That's okay, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Very good question. Mm-hmm. That's a very difficult one to deal with. A provider, like someone who's in mental health, who's a counselor, they're like, oh, I'm not going to go access help. I know everything they're going to do. I know everything they're going to say. Some things that can help are find a good therapist. It took me a few years, but I found a therapist for myself that specializes in working with people who work as therapists, because we make horrible clients. It's just like a physician being a bad patient. We're the same way when it comes to mental health a lot of times. So it's encouraging them to find a therapist, but to keep trying until they find one who specializes in working with therapists, because the approach is completely different. Remind them that, yes, you may know what they're going to say and do, but on occasion, people know more than you, or know different than you, not even more, just know different approaches. And I'm worried about you, and I know you know all this stuff, but physician heal thyself doesn't always work. So just constantly encouraging them to try and get help, that you're here, that even though you're not a clinical counselor and you don't have that specialized training, you're a listening ear. You're willing to do whatever they need. Drive them to the hospital. Come make them a hot meal. Just sit with them in quiet because they don't want to be alone or feel unsafe. So sometimes you have to get really creative in what your help looks like, especially if they're resistant because they're like, oh, I know everything they're going to try. So just staying persistent and available is a lot of times really all you can do. But remind them you don't know everything in a nice way. Because I struggled with that when I needed my own therapist. It was like, same thing. I know what they're going to say. I saw 3 steps ahead before they did it because I did the same thing. But you also have to try and turn that part of your brain off and remind them that staying open to having conversations, even if it's a conversation you've done as the therapist, is very different when you're the patient. So just keep encouraging them to find someone that they can talk to and turn off the clinical part of their brain as much as possible. But it's very difficult. Good question. No easy answer, unfortunately. Any other questions, or did we have any in the index cards that we wanted to do?
Yes, I think we've touched on it a little bit, but I'll just read them
Okay.
out loud. It says, "What is the proper plan of action if I think or suspect a friend is suicidal?" And the second question is, "How should we handle a person who is obviously struggling and making posts on social media?"
Mm. So Facebook did this great thing, and I don't do Instagram or Twitter or anything else, so I don't know if they also have something similar. But Facebook has a way where you can report a post, and they have algorithms that scan posts too, and sometimes they catch things. Or you can report posts, and they will actually have a crisis responder reach out to that person and say, look, you had this social media post, we're concerned, do you need help? Or sometimes it'll trigger, if their algorithm catches certain words, it'll trigger them to then respond to that person with a message and say, here's the crisis hotline. um, so that kind of does it a little bit. But then with social media, it can be tricky because sometimes we're only friends with people on social media. They're not like our in life, real world friends, too. So the outreach you can do is limited, but you can always say, reach out to them and say, hey, this post really worried me. Are you all right? Do you need help? If it's somebody you do know, can I come over? Can I do anything? Do you need to talk? So just reaching out, being present, letting them know you're available. But what was the first part of the question? Asking about if someone's suicidal, what's the plan of action?
Yes.
Okay. Don't ever try to negotiate, first of all, with somebody who has a weapon of any kind. That's an automatic 911. If they're talking about actively trying suicide, that's an automatic 911. If they're just approaching mental health crisis, it's a lot of the being present, being reassuring, being honest. There's no quick fixes, but I'm here with you. You matter. You'll know the person, and hopefully you'll know what might be helpful, or try what might be helpful for you to hear and see if it resonates with the other person. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That is a real risk. That's why if you're encountering someone who has a weapon of any kind, like a knife or a firearm, and they're using that as their means of suicide attempt, that's extricate yourself and call 911 and let the ambulance and the police and the 911 responders handle that because you don't want to put yourself at risk. But, like, let's say you encounter someone who's just taken an overdose of medication as their attempt. You can interrupt that attempt by calling 911 and getting them to the hospital for treatment. So it's a very delicate balance of making sure you're safe primarily, because if you're in danger, you're no help to the other person. So that's when, again, don't worry about calling 911 and the ramifications for the other person if they're actively at risk for themselves. Does that make sense? And what was the other part? Mm-hmm. They do document. They have a system where they document what they've done, what they've talked about, what steps they've taken, but it's internal to them only. Let's say a veteran calls 988, they will get a follow up from the VA the next day. So we get alerted from the 988 call center that a veteran has called, and we get a report of whatever they've called about. We get some of the craziest calls. Sometimes people call because it's 2 o'clock in the morning and they can't sleep, or they've just had a nightmare, or they've had a fight with their spouse, or they want to enroll in VA healthcare and don't know where to start. We get calls for all kinds of reasons. But the nice thing is there's an immediate follow-up the next business day from a suicide prevention coordinator to make sure that they have everything they need that didn't get resolved from that call. Um, Crisis line workers try to do similar. They try to get them hooked with resources that will follow up with them the next day, but they can refuse those resources as long as they're not at imminent risk to harm themselves. It's just a talking session, and it's only within their database. So, like, you're not flagged, you're not put on a list. I don't even know if they can tell how many times one person's called. I don't know that their system is designed that way. But it is for them to document what they did so they can learn from the calls and make sure everything was done properly. So it's not like you're listed somewhere, but they do document what happens. Yeah. That is a definite concern I can see why she had, and that's a really good threat for someone to make. But the fact that maybe she was suicidal and sought help and is improved, even if she has another suicidal crisis, that doesn't automatically make her an unfit parent in the eyes of the court. They may mandate treatment. They may say, things have to be monitored while you're in crisis. But as long as they're out of that imminent risk category and not in active crisis, there's nothing that says they can't safely keep their children. Now, if they've made a suicide attempt in the home, sometimes children's services can get involved to make sure the home is safe when the parent returns, if they survive their attempt, for the children still living there. But it's not done in a punitive way or we're taking your children. That's only like if you're in active crisis and are neglecting the kids. Sometimes CPS can get called and get involved. But a lot of times when the crisis resolves itself, which usually doesn't take very long, crises, the worst part of it, the acute risk side, is usually a very short time. It's the long term dealing with the fallout where the problems come in. So no, it's a threat that a lot of people are afraid of, but it doesn't actually work that way in the court system every single time. I can't say it'll never happen, but that's not the norm. Good question. Do we have any other? Oh, yes. Sure. Mm. Yeah. compassion fatigue is a real thing. So, first time I experienced it is when I was doing PTSD therapy in our clinic in Wilmington. I did that for 3 years. I started having dreams about the trauma accounts, the combat traumas we were going over in therapy with my variety of clients, because that's all I did was combat related PTSD treatment. And about 2 years in, I started having combat dreams. I've never been in the military. It was really weird and distressing. So I had to do really good self care and take care of myself. That's where my first initial go around with a therapist came in, because I wasn't sure how to process that. You know, when you're dealing with somebody in crisis, even if it's just one person, that's incredibly heavy and difficult to process. And you can oftentimes experience your own crisis once theirs has gotten safely tucked away and being dealt with. So, anytime you're helping a loved one or doing it in a professional capacity, taking care of yourself is very important. And it's more than just taking a bubble bath or laying a candle. You know, those are the kind of go-tos a lot of people say is self-care, which those are great if that works for you. But you got to find an outlet. And this is true for anyone who has any sort of chronic stress issues. You got to find a good outlet. Like, remember that first part of the safety plan was, what can I do to distract myself? That's why I cook. I love to get in the kitchen and cook. I don't have to think about the day. I can focus on my ingredients and my measurements. And as a bonus, I get to feed other people, because feeding people is my love language. So you have to find outlets. Even if you just dealt with one family member's one acute crisis that one time, you've got to do something afterwards to take care of yourself so you don't experience your own crisis. And that is compassion fatigue, basically. So yeah, it's important to remember that you can, what's the analogy? Always put your mask on first on the airplane if something were to happen, because you can't help anybody else if you're oxygen deprived. Well, when you're dealing with somebody in crisis, it's very similar. You've got to take good care of yourself so that you can help the other person. So it's important to even debrief. Like, let's say you have a friend or family member that you've helped through a mental health crisis. It's important you find someone yourself to debrief with, to go over what went well, what could I have done better, did I do everything? The what ifs. The what ifs will drive you crazy. So it's important that whether it's a one-time emergency or it's something you do a lot, or you have someone who's always in and out of crisis, is taking really good care of yourself. Very good question. But yes, compassion fatigue is real and very difficult. So, yeah. Yeah. Because you want to connect with the people that you're working with, and you need to be emotionally available to connect with people, but you only have so much to give. And so you got to take breaks and you got to take care of yourself. But yeah, and that's true, you know, like even your bishop, for example. He's got to take good care of himself because he's got to be available to take care of you guys spiritually, right? Well, it's the same thing when you're dealing with people in crisis. You got to take good care of you to take care of people. Good question. Yes. Um, there's not any obvious signs that someone has had an attempt outside of sometimes you just asking. It's not always very obvious. Um, People are good at hiding things they've done in the past that they're ashamed of or embarrassed of. And a lot of times when people have survived a suicide attempt, they feel ashamed that they've done it. They may feel embarrassed. They may feel more like a failure because they weren't successful. They may have more frequent crises because whatever led them to be suicidal and make that attempt maybe hasn't resolved yet. So there's really no huge telltale signs outside of just having a conversation with someone. So that's why you look for the crisis as early as possible. Because if they have made a suicide attempt, they are more likely to attempt again. than someone who has never tried before. So that's why catching crisis early and then having that conversation of, has this ever been an issue for you? What did you do last time? What stopped you from doing it this time? Having those kinds of conversations can be helpful to figure out what their past looks like. But it is perfectly acceptable in the context of a serious conversation to ask someone, have you ever made a suicide attempt? Have you ever felt, not even a full attempt, have you ever felt unsafe by yourself? Good question.
I have a question.
Oh, yes.
I appreciated you speaking about kind of both sides of suicidal ideation, where it's like that negative event, but also the positive events. And we typically think about suicidal ideations coming in those really tough and dark times, but we don't really highlight how those really positive events, like having a baby, that big major move, or starting that new job that's a little overwhelming but still excited, how that can become so overwhelming that people start to have troubling thoughts. So could you speak a little more about that, and if you would tailor your approach to kind of supporting someone in that positive event while they're still having those dark thoughts?
Usually, people that struggle with the positive events, that are feeling overwhelmed and overly stressed, are already dealing with so much stress that they don't have any coping skills left to deal with a positive stressor. So, a lot of times, if you see someone struggle even with good things like just having a baby, being sleep deprived, not having any time to yourself, having to worry about being a mom or being a dad, and all of the things that go along with having this new little itsy bitsy thing in front of you. Like, that can be incredibly stressful and overwhelming. But if you already don't have good coping skills, that can throw you into a crisis pretty fast. So it's not the positive thing itself that can make you experience crisis, it's the fact that you're already overwhelmed, you're already stressed, maybe you don't know how to cope really healthy with what's going on. And so this good thing happens, and it's like the straw that broke the camel's back. It's just the last thing you could possibly take. And so it's really not tailoring the approach because the final stressor was a positive. It's what led up to it and what can we do to stop it from getting worse so you can stop the crisis from progressing. Then you can go back to, okay, all this bad stuff happened, but all this great stuff happened too. Let's start reframing how we look at things and try to remind them of the positives. Remember, don't over preach or over promise positives, but always make that part of the conversation. So I think that that becomes important to point out. Well, no wonder you're struggling with your recent move. You know, you're having a hard time at work and your kids being difficult, and it's expensive to move, so now your money's tight. Like, it makes sense you would be struggling with something that's so positive. So a lot of normalization helps there too, I think. Y'all have some good questions. Keep me on my toes. Anything else, or did we have? Oh, yes, ma'am. That might be a good conversation to have when the person's not in crisis and say, look, I see all these red flags and you're handling it really well right now, but down the road that might change. If one more bad thing happens, maybe you don't handle it so well. And so I want you to know that I'm here if that happens. Or if that happens, here's a resource. Call 988. They can talk to you even if you're not full blown crisis, if you're just struggling a little bit and need a confidential person to talk to. It's confidential unless you're at risk to yourself, and then they may have to break confidentiality. But up until that point, you can call them for any reason. So give them the resource ahead of time. You can also say, you're doing well now and I see you're coping now, but man, if I was dealing with everything you'd be dealing with in the future or that you are dealing with now, I don't know how I would cope. So I just want you to watch out for and list a few warning signs. Or if you start, say to them, if you start feeling overwhelmed, before it gets really bad, call me. I don't care if it's 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm here to talk to you. Or call 988 or whatever sort of support you can give them and say, even though you're doing good now, sometimes people struggle who is dealing with all this stuff. So I just want you to be aware that it's okay to ask for help if you're having a hard time. So it's planting that seed so that if the crisis does develop, maybe that seed sprouts a little bit and they go, oh, I'm really not doing so good. Maybe I should call my friend, or she gave me that number. Maybe I should try it and see if it helps. So sometimes planting that seed when they're not in crisis can help mitigate how bad the crisis becomes. But there's nothing wrong with you pointing out and saying, and normalizing. People who are going through what you're going through can struggle down the road. So I just want to make sure you stay okay. Does that make sense? Good.
I have another one if no one else.
Okay.
Can you speak a little bit about, so you talked about asking the question and someone says, yes, I am. I have a plan. I'm going to attempt tonight. This is what I'm planning to do. Can you speak a little bit about what you might kind of talk through with that person in terms of what questions you want to be asking, but also what information you want to be prepared for when you do call to maybe have someone intervene? So, if we have to call the police, that could be a really kind of anxiety-provoking situation for the
Absolutely.
supporter. So what might you, say, and what kind of information do you want to have readily prepared when you call to make sure you're maximizing that opportunity to get that person help?
One of the most important things is, where are they? Because sometimes you may notice the risk factors, or they may be on the phone with you saying, like when my friend called to say goodbye, I had to figure out where he was so I knew where to send help. I didn't know if he was at home, was he in his car in a parking lot? So I had to keep him talking to get that information. So it's important, A, to know where you're sending them. B, you want to know as much details about what their plan is as you can to let the authorities know, are they coming into a hot situation where there might be weapons involved or not, because it's going to change their approach. The other good thing about having to intervene with the police, and I'll come back to the question here in a second, but I had a thought, is most officers or most police departments are trained in what's called critical incident training. So there are officers that are trained to deal with people that are experiencing mental health crisis. So it's not just barge in, throw the cuffs, take them away. It's having a conversation with them, assessing for safety. That's the other thing you can do. Just because the person's having suicidal thoughts doesn't mean you have to intervene right that second beyond your conversation. Even if they have a plan, what you're trying to determine is, do they have intent to act on that plan, and is their intent going to be in the very near future? Like, you can't say they're going to be safe once you leave them or hang up the phone. That's when you're going to intervene with the police or 911, because they can't keep themselves safe. And remember the best three referral options. If you can't get them immediate help, or if they're not at imminent risk and don't need the police to intervene right then, still give them resources, still tell them how to access the help, call them the next day, go see them the next day, offer to drive them to their doctor's appointment and sit with them if they're nervous. So it's really assessing. Just because they're having a suicidal thought doesn't mean there needs to be a strict intervention. It's, do they have a plan? And if they have a plan, do they have intent to act on the plan? Because I've worked with lots of veterans who have chronic suicidal thoughts. It's like part of their daily thinking, even if they don't want it to be. It's intrusive thoughts. And sometimes they know how they would do it. It's like a backup plan. It's like having their safety plan in their back pocket almost. If things get way bad, I know what I'm going to do. But they're not at imminent risk to do it. Like, there's no plan to act on it right away. So you want to give them as much support and resources as you can. But if you think that they're in danger, that's an immediate police intervention, and try to give the police as many details as you can to help them intervene, especially if they're CIT trained. So they would be a little more sensitive to the person's struggles and know how to get them to agree to come in for help, for example. Did I answer your question? Okay. Anybody else? again, thank you all so very much for letting me come talk to you today. I really appreciate your time and your attention. And I know these are difficult conversations. I'm by no means a content expert, so please feel free to reach out if you think of other questions. I'll think I brought some cards, but you can always reach out to these lovely ladies, and they can get a hold of me too, or just talk with each other. A lot of times, supporting each other when you're supporting someone else is very difficult. You lean on your resources when you're trying to help somebody else. That's very important. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Come on, let's let our presenter know how effective she has been with us. Come on, weren't you blessed by this conversation? Oh, thank you so much. Of course, it has been just a blessing to be able to have her here. And of course, she shared so much and sharing very important about making sure we understand the mental health aspect of suicide before even trying to process it from a faith standpoint. And I think each of these conversations are very important. I look so forward to Dr. Garman and Dr. Somerville. And we just thank God for them and their leadership, these psychologists who are doing a great work here in our church, helping us to stay focused. And I just want to say I listened to the presentation. It was heart-wrenching and thought-provoking. And she mentioned something about pain. And it led me to begin just briefly exploring conversations that I can have with the church. And I take no shame in saying that I heard her mentioning about pain, and I'm going to build a class for us that will talk about the language of pain, understanding the sovereignty of God through the suicide of Judas. And what we will do, we will explore what pain meant in the early Christian church. And we will talk about how pain in the early Christian environment was different than how we process pain now. And then what we'll do is we'll also bring in, and I'll use Dr. Somerville and Dr. Garman to check my notes. We'll look at the neuroscience aspect of pain. And then what we'll do, we'll take it back and go back to the text. And then we will see how Christians dealt with pain over the time centuries. And then what we'll do, we'll begin to manage that, look at the sovereignty of God. And then we'll end up in the life of Judas, the moments that he, in the New Testament, takes his life. And as a result, we will talk about the implications spiritually for Christians, because what we did not hear, and she set the stage and level set the room, and I think it was a very appropriate thing to do, that to talk about these types of conversations, we first have to understand the social impact first before you can deal with the spiritual aspect. Sometimes as persons of faith, we try to go to someone to encourage them biblically or encourage them through scripture or share a story about our faith. And while that might feel good to you to share, it may not be the best information to share with them, because they can't receive it spiritually if they're still fighting through things socially or mentally or emotionally. So I'm so glad that Ms. Morrison set the tone for us in that way, so that we can begin building on that in our conversations about even more difficult matters. And we do the same thing. We build on what we have to deal with as humans first. Then let's talk about the application of our faith. Let's receive now our presenters, whomever will come and close us out, Dr. Garman, Dr. Somerville. Let's receive them now.
Well, thank you all so much for coming out this wonderful morning, and thank you, Bishop, again for just supporting this space. This has been wonderful information, Ms. Morrison. Thank you so much for sharing critical information, but it was also very practical, very informational in terms of how we can have a hands-on approach to helping those that we love and care about, but also how we can care for ourselves. I mean, I don't want us to miss that piece, how important it is for as helpers, for us to care for ourselves as we help others. We want to put on that mask put our oxygen mask on first and help each other. So this is just critical. We hope this information has been useful. The Focus Committee, we always want this to be information that you can use to change how you move through life, change how you interact with others, how you support the community, because we're doing that together. So again, thank you so much for coming out. Thank you, Ms. Morrison, for the information. I want to definitely plug our next Stay Empowered or Stay Focused Empowerment Session, and that's coming up on October the 18th. That's Saturday, October the 18th. And we'll get more information out about that. But we're going to be learning about how we can support those who are survivors or currently experiencing domestic violence. Another topic that we don't typically address, we don't address it enough, but it is another community problem. Domestic violence, or now we call it intimate partner violence. So we want to learn more about that and how we can be helpful and supportive. So again, thank you so much. I'm going to pass this to Dr. Somerville, and we're going to wish you a blessed weekend.
Well, thank you all for coming. I hope you found this helpful. I know we went through a few questions, but if you have any questions that you'd like to talk about to the side or privately, or even if they come up a week or two from now or at any point, please feel free to always reach out and seek some support. We're always here to help you. So we'll let you go and enjoy your Saturday, but thank you for giving us a little portion of